welcome. We've got a packed house. Feel free to take a seat if you can find one. It looks like we've got some up here. Plenty of standing room in the back. I thought there'd be a couple people still milling at the bar, but I think we've actually lured everyone with their drinks to seats, which is fantastic. Welcome, everybody. How about this turnout? How about the drinks at lunch and the apps? Let's give a clap for the events team. Welcome everyone to our Glassdoor Power Panel on how to boost your brand on Glassdoor. Incredibly excited to have everybody here. Before I get going, I want to remind anyone who is here in the room and also everyone who's tuning in on the live stream that we do have a hashtag. It's hashtag GDPanel. So feel free to engage on Twitter and take pics and talk about the speakers and share cool insights and sound really smart on social media, which we all love to do. I also want to thank our sponsors, iSIMS, TMP, and Smashfly, for helping make this fantastic event, which again included drinks at lunch, which I don't know if we promoted that, but that may have been the reason why we have a packed house today. So my name's Alison Hadden. I'm the Senior Director of Brand Strategy at Glassdoor. And what we're going to talk about today, really before we bring the experts up, is I want to share a little bit about kind of where things all began at Glassdoor and give you a little bit of history. So Glassdoor's been around for about 8 years. Our founders, Rich Barton, Tim Bessie, and Robert Homan, were three people who were behind two earlier companies that also brought transparency and information that helped people make better decisions. They did it first with Expedia. For some of you who are in the room, you may not be familiar. There was a job title. It was called travel agent. It's a travel agent. And this travel agent, in years past, they were the only people that had access to information around travel and how you could basically package things together like flights and hotels and save money. There was a time in which that information was not readily available to you and I. Expedia was one of the first companies that took the information on travel, made it available to people so that they could make better decisions around their travel plans. Then they did the same thing with Zillow. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Zillow. So Zillow, most people here are familiar, brought transparency to the real estate market. The same thing. Instead of having information in the hands only of brokers and agents, the founders of Glassdoor were the ones that said, why don't we give that information and put it in the hands of people so they could make better informed decisions about buying and selling their home. So when it came to Glassdoor 8 years ago, the idea was, well, what if we could do the same thing in the employment space? What if we could take information that previously, you could only find out if you knew someone at the company, and we brought that information out, shared it with the world, and in turn would help people kind of make better decisions about what companies they would work at. And that we also think could help companies hire better people who were the right fit for their companies. And Glassdoor was born. And now, as most of you know, we were finally able to give people a platform at Glassdoor to, anonymously share feedback on their experience working for current and former employers. And with that, job seekers could learn really critical information about a company before applying. Glassdoor has now grown 8 years later to have over 30 million unique visitors a month. We've got over 13 million reviews. We've grown from just sort of company reviews and ratings to things like interview reviews and ratings, to benefits information, any number of things that now people can rate. And then as a job seeker, you can go and actually filter and sort by this information so that you can find the company that's got the right job for you. And one of the most important things is now, for employers, the opportunity to advertise your jobs on Glassdoor gives those who are already researching your company kind of the direct opportunity to then research your company, say, yeah, this does sound like a good fit for me. The good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it is the right one. And they're able to apply directly on site. So as a result, Glassdoor's created a job site with really this highly engaged, well-researched pool of candidates that our employers, and we've got about 4,000 clients right now, tell us are really the highest quality candidates and the best fit because they've done their research on Glassdoor. And we've seen that in the data. So another thing I want to talk about before we bring everyone up is my job at Glassdoor. I'm not the head of employer branding. We've brought on a fantastic leader in Kirsten Davidson, who came to us from Visa, who now is responsible solely for driving our own internal employer branding efforts at Glassdoor. But employer branding is not just the employer branding group or person's responsibility. It's not just necessarily tied to recruiting, which everyone in this room is probably aware of. But really, employer branding is a critical part of a broader company's corporate brand strategy, which is what I'm responsible for at Glassdoor. Basically, when an individual is making a decision around their perception of a brand as a consumer, not just a job seeker, but someone who's purchasing products and services, what we're finding in the data is that employees more and more are becoming one of the most trusted resources in educating people on what that brand is, whether or not their products and services are a good fit. So employees more and more are becoming a really powerful tool for us to actually sell our company's products and services. And now in the age of information technology, giving employees the opportunity to share socially online about what it's like to work at their company actually has an impact on bottom line performance. A couple of things that I posted before I was here, I was looking at something, and Edelman did a study in 2015, and they found that 84% of engaged employees believed that they have the potential to impact the quality of the organization's products versus 31% of disengaged employees. So the impact that you're having on this room on employee engagement has a direct impact on the perception that people have in buying your company's products and services. Another thing, a lot of people will ask me, well, what's your social media policy? And, should we arm employees with tools to go and share? Should we encourage them to actually go on Glassdoor and share a review? We're scared, right? We're scared about it. Or we have people that work in HR and recruiting that talk to me and say, we see the value in HR, but gosh, we just can't get the executive team on board with this. So 2 stats I wanted to share that I think are relevant. There's a 50% increase in employees recommending products and services for their company when their employer encourages what we call social sharing. That was a Weber-Shandwick survey that was completed last year. And for those companies that say, well, that's fine, we'll encourage the employees to share, but as executives or as the CEO, we need to just kind of stay out of the conversation. Raise your hand if that sounds familiar. Okay, so there's a couple of people struggling with that. So based on an MBA Online survey from 2015, 8 out of 10 consumers are likely to trust executives and CEOs who are actively using social media. So when we see these things, and again, it's the reason why I'm here today representing Glassdoor, is your employer brand is not only a critical part of your recruiting strategy, but it also plays a role in your broader corporate brand strategy and has a downstream effect on your ability to really drive bottom line performance. And as most of you know, if you're working in HR or in talent acquisition, we're always trying to get resources, and the way to get more resources is to show the bottom line impact of the work that you and your team are doing on the business's bottom line. So the more that you can arm your executive team with these kind of stats that say your engagement on Glassdoor is important. I'm sure we're going to talk about this on the panel, but at Glassdoor, our CEO, Robert Homan, actively every week goes on Glassdoor and responds to reviews, both from employees and also from candidates who go through our interview process. I know last year, our keynote speaker at the Glassdoor Summit, Spencer Raskoff, who's the CEO of Zillow and was one of the top-rated CEOs last year, he does the same thing, where he has a regular piece in his calendar every week, and he loves it, and he actually actively engages on Glassdoor, responds to reviews, and this is basically showing candidates today and employees that, hey, executive leadership, they're listening. But again, I look at it from sort of a consumer brand strategy standpoint and say, every time you can get the engagement from an executive, especially on a platform like Glassdoor with such a large audience, you're actually lifting the brand perception of those consumers that are likely to purchase your products and services. So it's all tied together. Before I bring up everyone, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is, what I hope everyone walks away with here today. you know that employer branding is important. We're talking about branding today on the Power Panel. You understand the impact today of your employer brand on your recruiting strategy, mainly because today's job seekers are looking for more than just salary, right? They care about culture and mission and being part of something that is purpose-driven. In addition to salary, they're looking for work-life balance, potentially. They're also looking for benefits. They want to find a company where they don't have to take any transportation to work and to walk there. Or they want to find a company where they're still able to pick up their kids from work every day at 4 o'clock and have that work into their schedule. This idea of what job seekers want has become incredibly complex and dynamic. And as a result, there needs to be places like Glassdoor where they can go and get all of that information so that they can make the right decision, which is going to end up not only helping your recruitment efforts, but also your retention efforts. Because we all know what it's like, and I know because I was there once, not at Glassdoor, of course, when I took a job without really having the inside scoop on what it was like to work there. And for some people, it's 3 months. For other people, it's 3 weeks. For me, it was about 3 hours. And I sat there and I just went, oh no, this is not what I expected, right? So that company benefited because yes, they got me to apply and they were able to check off the rec, and recruiting was high-fiving because they filled it and they could move on to the next one. But I was one of those employees that sooner or later, it was much sooner, I said, you know what, I don't think this is the right fit for me, and then all of a sudden it's impacting attrition, right? Raise your hand if that is a familiar story for anybody in the room. Okay, but I'm sure not at the companies that you're with right now. Everyone is happily engaged. So I'm incredibly excited. I'll share a little bit more, I'm sure, on the panel about what we're doing at Glassdoor, some of the things that we've done really well at Glassdoor internally, and in the vein of transparency, some of the things that we haven't done so well that we're working on. Because again, we really believe in that idea that transparency and authenticity is what drives a strong brand, be it from an employer brand perspective, a consumer brand, a corporate brand perspective, and one that's going to be here for a long time. So I'm incredibly excited to welcome the panel. I'm going to bring up here our moderator, Katie Burke from HubSpot, who is the Vice President of Culture and Experience and really the true expert here. So help me welcome Katie.
Hi. So for those of you wondering if Alison and I are wearing the same dress, the answer is yes. For those of you asking the next natural question, which is, am I living my one-time dream of becoming a pop star? The answer is also yes. We would have dressed as Britney Spears from different eras had we been informed accordingly, but given that we weren't, what I'd like to do is welcome up my fellow panelists who are going to be the experts. I'm actually going to have them introduce themselves, and I'm going to close this drape so the live stream gets a better view. So you guys come on up and get seated while I close this and help Danielle out. Do you need help? No, I think we're good. Okay. So that we get a sense of who's in the room and make this as relevant as possible for everyone, raise your hand if you are in a recruiting function. Great. How about employment brand marketing folks? How about HR professionals? How about you're here for the wine? Okay, healthy mix. Thank you for your honesty. I very much appreciate it. I respect that. You were talking authenticity and transparency. This woman right here is living and breathing. So as Alison was nice enough to mention, I'm Katie Burke. I work for a marketing software company in Cambridge, Massachusetts called HubSpot. We're really trying to revolutionize how people live and work to match how modern humans actually want to enjoy and engage with their workplace. So that's why I'm here today. I'm also a very proud Glassdoor customer and advocate. So I'm going to hand things over. Karen, if you wouldn't mind getting us started with name, company, and one thing that your company employment brand stands for. I know we all want to give our laundry list, but let's all do one and keep ourselves disciplined. Ms. Karen.
Hi, so I'm Karen Liu. I'm from Pinterest, based out of San Francisco. One thing that we stand for, I think for us, we want our culture to come through on our Glassdoor page and our employment brand strategy. Like you said, before it was always you had to know someone who worked there or you had to have like inside information. We want everybody to know what it's like to be a Pinterest employee and to be able to opt in if that's something that you're interested in.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, hi. I'm Britt Ryan. I run global recruiting for Lithium Technologies in San Francisco. And I think, so ours is definitely based on our values. I think one of our values is be real, and we hear that all the time. So for us, it's be real with our candidates, be real with our employees, be transparent, and that absolutely ties into giving people a window for what everyday life is like, that they really feel like they can have an intimate relationship with us, and that it's a two-way street in terms of getting from being, a prospective candidate to being an employee, that you really feel like you know who Lithium is when you're, buying into it and signing that offer letter to come on board.
Fantastic. Thanks, Britt. Larry, you didn't know you were signing up to join a girl band, but welcome. Thank you for signing up. You're a brave soul. Tell us a little bit about CARFAX.
Every girl band needs a good backup dancer.
That's right.
I will lodge one complaint. The power panelists were not aware that there was wine being served. I don't know if that was a tactical decision, but I'm Larry Gamache. I'm the communications director at CARFAX, and in that role, I manage both our consumer brand and help manage our employer brand. We really believe that those two things should be consistent. And I think the one thing that we really want to have come through in our brand is that we're here to help. We're a company that has a mission to help millions of people. While we help millions of people make better decisions about used cars, we also want to help our employees tap into that mission, understand that they're working for a higher purpose, and make sure they're well supported while they're doing that. So I think that's the core thing about our consumer brand that we want to have echoed in our employee brand.
Fantastic. Anne.
My name's Ann Poletti. I'm with DocuSign, and I think the one word that comes to mind is impact. We want to have an impact on the communities and the businesses that we work with and our partners, and we want to transform the way they're doing their business and getting things done, and have fun in the meantime. Seriously, we have fun.
Alison.
And again, Alison from Glassdoor. I think the things I think about when I think about the Glassdoor brand, our mission is to help people everywhere find a job and company they love. We feel really passionate about that, and I believe that the values of transparency, authenticity, being honest, being trusted. We believe that people today, when making decisions about, as small as a lint remover for dog hair, which I was on Amazon for 25 minutes looking at that the other day, you can only imagine the amount of time we're spending thinking about big decisions and how reviews have played a part in that. We believe today that it's not about perfection, it's about authenticity, and people just want companies now to be real. So we're trying to do that at Glassdoor and enable other companies to do that as well.
So let's introduce the elephant in the room early. There are a lot of folks here who are recruiters and think that recruiting should own the employment brand. There are a lot of marketers in the house who are like, we know brand and marketing, we know our stuff. Help us understand where employment branding falls within your various organizations, and maybe a tip that you've had from your experience on how to navigate that balance. Karen, you want to start us off?
So for my role, we sit in recruiting. So I have a team that sits within recruiting. That being said, I also partner very closely with our marketing, our PR team, and we have a brand team in-house that primarily does brand design for the product, but we also tap into their resources to do things like career site, or if we want to do a video about Pinterest and what it's like to work there, they'll help with that sort of stuff. So my tip would be to form those relationships really early. I had the benefit of being at Pinterest really early, and so those people all came after me, so they had to work with me. And so, I think that's key, just having those really solid relationships that you can tap into those resources when you need them and build a really strong partnership, because you're going to need those people to, even if you don't sit in one of those teams, you're going to need them to launch any initiative almost that you're working on.
And PSA, Karen and her team do a great job at drinking their own champagne. They have Pinterest boards dedicated to their employee activities and resource groups that I find myself when I have spare time in an airport flipping through just for
champagne and all other things, probably.
That's exactly right. Britt, how about you?
Yeah, sure. So Lithium's a pretty small company, or probably on the smaller end of the spectrum. For my colleagues up here, we have over 400 employees now. So we own employment brand. I own employment brand as the head of recruiting. I don't have anyone on my staff who actually helps with this. So it is absolutely an intimate partnership with our marketing group. I think most often we're the ones who are going to them and saying, hey, can you help us with this? Hey, can you help us with that? What about that? You know, we've also outsourced stuff. We have one videographer in the whole company. He's on the marketing team. He's not available. I'm like calling up our partners to see where we can pull in from different areas. So, you know, we outsource some stuff. I also give things out to my team, so I can't do everything on my own. So, you know, I might ask one recruiter to help with our Glassdoor page and other recruiters to help with other areas where we have a presence to make sure that our content's fresh and that our brand is fresh. But some of the things that our marketing team does help us with is like our social calendar. So where we post, when we post, what we post. They've been great about that. You know, we're on HipChat. I'm sure a lot of you guys are on Slack, but like those are my communications where I'm like, you know, pinging our head of PR and I'm like, well, what do you think about this? Or can I do this? So it's just a very, you know, I think we have a very natural back and forth, which is one of the beauties of a small company is that, you know, you can just walk down the hall and ask people and there's not a whole lot of bureaucracy around getting stuff done.
That's great. Larry, you're on the communication side of things to bring a unique perspective. You mentioned you do kind of core branding and employer branding. Do you see that? Do you partner with the recruiting team? What does that look like?
No, I don't partner with recruiting. I tell recruiting what they should do. No, I think, actually, I think we take a slightly different tack when it comes to our brand, and it might be based a little bit on my philosophy, but, you know, I don't believe we own our brand. Our brand exists only in relationship to our customers, much like our brand only exists in relationship with our staff. And at CARFAX, we really do take the approach that our team owns our brand. There are members of the team, me and others, who try to curate that brand, try to understand its essence, and then, you know, we want to put our best foot forward, but much like you're saying at Glassdoor, we own both the good and bad of our brand, and that is really you know, custodianed by our team. And we want to put in the hands of our team ways and tools that they can let our brand exist in the world with minimal, you know, tending and curating by us. So.
Anne, how about you at DocuSign?
So at DocuSign, I report to the head of HR, and we set what the brand pillars and positioning were, the employment brand pillars. We came up with a full identity system, a color system, tone, style, guideline, voice, etc. And then I work with everyone who touches the job candidate through the existing employee and work with them to make sure they're on brand. So I'll work with recruiting to scrub the job descriptions and revamp those, which is a project that we just did. I'll work with them on different events and coming up with a name for our university intern program. I'll work with the onboarding team. I work with the different people who hold like sales boot camps and different training, DocuSign University. And then I really work a lot with the e-staff because we hold leadership meetings, all hands meetings, different town halls that are issue specific. And so recruiting is a partner and they're also a client. HR Business Partners is a partner and they're also a client. DocuSign Impact, our social responsibility group, is a partner and a client. And I work with them, I strategize, they say, listen, we want to push this something out like this to job candidates, or we need to raise the level of noise in Australia. And I sit down, I strategize with them, and then we figure out how to leverage different resources. So sometimes I'm coming up with things, sometimes they're coming up with things, we tweak it to make sure it's on brand, and then we leverage our internal marketing channels depending on who we're trying to reach to figure out the best way to get the word out. So that might be social media, the creative team, can be partnering with our PR team, and all sorts of things like that.
And Anne, just to push on that, the employer or employment-focused brand guidelines, are they cousins with your external consumer-facing brand guidelines? Are they sisters? Are they
Right.
twins? Give us an understanding of how much variance there is between that and your core brand standards.
So we have a talent guide, a talent brand style guide, and it lives in concert with our brand. But there are different elements of it that are slightly different, right? We want it to be a little more intimate, a little more unplugged, a little bit more behind the scenes. So the pictures of people and the photography that we use is slightly different. The tone of the language is slightly different.
there are some graphic elements that are slightly different, but it still looks like DocuSign. In fact, when I worked very closely with the CMO of DocuSign and the VP of brand to go about even finding out what our culture was and why people come to work at DocuSign and why they stay. I interviewed 60 people in the company. It was great. It was awesome. And we distilled that, and then we came up with the positioning. So they were really sort of editors and helped me along the way, so it lives nestled within the brand. And if the larger brand were ever, our company brand were ever to shift, then I would revisit things to shift with the brand. But
great.
It's its own thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's super helpful and really unique, I think. So Alison, we already talked a little bit about the fact that you have a new head of employer brand, so let's switch gears a little bit if that's okay.
Sure.
Glassdoor, responding to Glassdoor reviews, it's a very meta concept here. Like, what happens when Robert gets a negative Glassdoor review? Does Robert respond? Do you guys have a discussion internally? Like, let's talk a little bit among the panel on who responds, so who owns the candidate or employee feedback, and then who actually owns the follow-up, right? There's the response, and people talk a lot about that, but then there's owning what we can learn from it. So if folks can touch upon that, maybe get us started, and then we'll go to you, Karen.
Sure, I definitely would love to hear from everyone else. As I said, this is really kind of a new emerging place for us to be focusing our time at Glassdoor, which, you know, bringing on someone who has such experience like Kirsten from Visa has been really helpful to share her own best practices on using Glassdoor and managing it and the ownership. It's been fantastic. And also getting out and having us get to talk with people like you and other customers and other employers. They're really the best source of information for us. So in terms of like a negative review, you know, we do actually have very strong reviews on Glassdoor. I want to remind people that regardless if you are Glassdoor, if you are a customer of Glassdoor, company big or small, it doesn't matter. We really hold our content guidelines and our community guidelines. The separation of church and state is something we hold really, really dear. And there's no way that an employer can ever do anything above the table or under the table, because all of it has been proposed, to edit, delete, or basically get rid of a review. It's something that's really important that I just want to stress to the people that are here. Basically, job seekers and employees wouldn't trust us if we did ever scrub the content or reorganize reviews. And if there is a review that you believe as an employer is up on Glassdoor, you can always flag it. You obviously can respond to it if you have a free employer account. And it can go through the human moderation process that many of our reviews go through to ensure that they meet our community guidelines. So I just wanted to put that out there. So if there is a review that we see on Glassdoor, we have the mentality that, again, engagement is more important than having the rose-colored glasses like everything's perfect. And what today's employees at Glassdoor, and we believe what probably all of us in the room want, is, again, we want that engagement, we want that authenticity and transparency, we want the communication, and we want it to be two-way. And that's why Glassdoor has, I think, been really valuable to employers, is it finally gives them a safe place to be transparent and have that two-way communication. Robert does respond to reviews. What we've also done, though, is if, for example, a review comes in from a certain location, which is a new feature that we added recently, so that you can actually sort reviews by region. So you can see maybe work-life balance is going great in Singapore, but it's not doing so great in London. Or maybe things are going really well in the sales org, but there's been a couple reviews that have bubbled up in engineering. So if there is something that's either by an office or by a department, what we do is we then sometimes will tap the department head and basically say, listen, this information or the response really shouldn't be coming from our CEO here. It should be coming from you because you're in the trenches. Luckily at Glassdoor, everyone is really behind that and understands the value. So we have department heads then that will step in and be able to actually add their own response, which we think is really valuable. Again, you don't just want the CEO responding to a review who is not in the trenches in the day-to-day. You want that head of engineering or that head of sales to be able to talk about the comp plan changing, or to talk about the issues that they're having with certain teams that have recently reshuffled. So that's what we've done in sort of best practices.
Fantastic. Karen, who responds to Glassdoor reviews at Pinterest? And then how do you think about that second step of the follow-up and the feedback that you can learn from good and bad reviews, I should say?
Yeah, so I respond, but I don't just do it in a vacuum. So we have some certain guidelines that we've established, like what are the things that we want to respond to, how do we want to approach those, and if there's ever a question, I'll loop in somebody like our head of diversity or a head of engineering or somebody who's affected by that review, similar to what Alice was saying. So I'll kind of partner with those, but I'll tend to draft most of the responses. And I agree, it's actually, the responses aren't as important as what you do with the content. So recently, probably late last year, we had some changes in our engineering org, and it created some flux with our employees, and they were leaving reviews on how they were feeling. And I don't think we would have had that content had they not been compelled to write a review. And while it wasn't great, and it was a little bit of a sting for us as we grow and we think about, oh, Pinterest is like peachy all the time, which is not true of any employer. But I think it was an eye-opening experience for us to know that there was some employees that were unhappy, and then we took that information and went back to the HR business partners and the head of engineering and said, okay, like what can we learn from this? What do we need to be doing differently? Because people are very transparent on Glassdoor, it's actually a blessing in disguise. So while you get these reviews that might sting a little bit, because especially for me in recruiting, you want to think that we're putting our best foot forward all the time. That's not always the case, and I think the negative reviews can sometimes bring that to reality, and then we take those and actually do something. So some of the things that we respond to are like, what are we doing about those? So we'll often respond saying thank you for the feedback, but we'll also say, here's what we're doing in relation to whatever it is exactly what you're asking for. So whether it's a new comp plan or a benefit that might be not working for people, or we've even been doing it on interviews. So when we get interview feedback, we're, things like people checking their cell phones during an interview. We were chatting about this earlier, something so simple, reminding our audience on Glassdoor that we're taking the initiative to do training, or that we're, as we grow, we're making sure that we have the right people in front of our candidates, things like that, that may not be necessarily transparent to the audience on Glassdoor, but we're putting that out there for them to see. So actual action items that we're taking in our responses.
And I like what you said about not just holding a recruiting meeting or accountable, but also hiring manager feedback. We've had some reviews where we get some consistent feedback around the specific hiring manager team, and it's great momentum in terms of them to say, you didn't say with a one-off review, oh, this was just which lines, whatever. This is the key in here, and it actually doesn't matter. I always say people, it doesn't matter who's right. What matters is the human experience, the candidate's experience, and what they're telling their friends about it. And as a result, if there are ways you can do better, maybe things that we can try, and maybe we say this is a process, but I think that's really important. Like, how about you guys?
Yeah, sure. So we have some similar experiences. So primarily our CEO response. And I'll be honest, I've been at the company for 2.5 years, and I came shortly after we moved. So we like moving from Portland to Hadden. We moved from the East Bay into San Francisco. And there was a lot of hoopla around that. And shortly thereafter, we acquired a company, Cloud. And so there was just a lot of churn. And we were a top employer on Glassdoor, and we got knocked off our pedestal with it. And I will say honestly, user account managers at Glassdoor, Tim, our guy is he's awesome, and he's really, really involved and really engaged. And I have the good fortune of living down the street from Glassdoor's office, so I camped out. But I know if I camped out on the phone, he would have been there too, and I said, what do we do with my CEO is emailing daily about this. He's taking it very personally, and he is upset. Help me out. And there were reviews that we flagged that we had reviewed. We also worked directly with our CEO and did some coaching around responding. He's very engaged in response. He actually, following that, also said, I want to start interviewing our finalists. Candidates, I want to make sure that they're having a great experience. And, you can't do that at a 10,000 person company, but with 400 people, I'd say he interviews 80 to 90% of our final candidates. So there's really no sort of perfect way to get around it, but I do think being open, being honest, being transparent, accepting what people are saying and addressing it and looking at how you can improve things is great. I mean, we all want the positive feedback. It's easy to be like, I'm so glad you had a great interview. I'm glad you took the job. But more importantly, you also just really, I think you need to embrace the negative stuff in order to be able to, continue to move forward and evolve.
I'm glad you guys both shared an experience, or almost a as a whole to think about great employment brands. So Google is amazing, Facebook is amazing, they're sort of infallible, and I think the reality of employment branding is every company goes through human changes, just like every employee does, and I think embracing that humanity is really, really critical.
Yeah, I think the one other thing too quickly I'd say is I always tell people at our company too, you have to take things with a grain of salt. You know, there is going to be someone out there who's just going to write a scathing review, and it doesn't matter where they're working, it doesn't matter who their boss is, they're just not going to be happy. And so I also, when I'm looking at other companies and looking through reviews, also sort of just think about that as a candidate, that it's not always going to be, 100% smelling like roses. So, some of the negative reviews out there may also not have anything to do that's, specifically about the company's culture or what's going on at the company, but more with that individual.
I also think sometimes it's a good reflection. You can't be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, like, for example, one of the characteristics that we don't rank as highly on as we do other things is work-life balance. And I say to people, we rank, top 10, all of these other things. We can't be all things to all people and try and cater to the masses, because then I think you fall short on all of them. And so I think just acknowledging, hey, there are some things we're still improving on or working on is helpful too. Larry, who responds at CARFAX?
It's primarily our HR team and our marketing team, and much like others, we try to put the response, an appropriate response, a person inside the organization most appropriate to respond. But I'd like to echo this idea that, it's great to get good reviews, it's great to have positive, but, we really do feel like we learn more from some of the negative reviews or some of the feedback that, is less enjoyable. And, and if, safe space and everything, I'll share, when the review talks about you personally and says something that you could do better, I think that's a real challenge to, if you're asking your organization to lean into the reviews, if you're asking your organization to really embrace opportunities to get better, personally, it's not the best thing when somebody mentions that you could personally be doing something better. But, as a person responsible for the brand, listening to that, learning from it, and leaning into it, I think it's really important. And you can see I'm an amateur girl band member. I'm clearly having problems with my microphone. But so I think we try and share the responsibility and respond as a team.
And given that you guys are leaders in the branding space, tell us a little bit about what you do on Glassdoor and maybe one thing on your page that you're particularly proud of at DocuSign.
Oh, sure. So we do all the standard, put the photos up, do updates, et cetera. Most recently, though, I did just mention a while back that we interviewed about 60 employees in the company and asked them, hey, so why did you even give us the time of day? Why did you choose to work at DocuSign? Why do you stay? What's your favorite snack in the kitchen? What do you do at DocuSign? And then, what do your kids say you do? That's kind of funny. Or, friends, family, et cetera. And we created something we call We Are DocuSign, and we played it back. When we did these interviews, we were not planning to do this, but what bubbled up was so inspiring, actually, that we went back and we took pictures of the different employees, and we're now, I call it refrying the beans, right, leveraging it through different things. We are promoting a We Are DocuSign content sort of series of employee spotlights, which launches every Sunday, and then we push that out through Glassdoor and the other social media channels. And I must say, by creating this original employment brand content, we are seeing more traffic to our DocuSign blog than we've ever seen. And we've seen the amount of resumes that come through our career site double in 3 months. So that's real money, that's ROI. If you can get more resumes of quality candidates, close that, put that person in the seat faster, and you're also being transparent about your culture, which we reveal quite clearly on Glassdoor, then people are going to screen and filter for themselves. So hopefully you're going to get a hire that sticks, loves the company, fits in with the culture, and can thrive and excel and contribute to the culture. So it was a really fun project. It's not what we intended to do, but it's where we landed, and the employees love it. So it's a lot of fun.
So amazing segue into metrics. So let's talk a little bit about how you measure success when it comes to employment branding and your engagement with Glassdoor. Alison, kick us off. If you were to say one metric that matters most as it relates to employment branding, what would be top of your list?
Oh, goodness. You know, to be totally candid, I think Kirsten Davidson would say, right now, we're in the process of figuring that out, to be really honest. There are a number of ways in which you can measure from sort of obviously the standard recruitment metrics around time to fill, and then you also can look at retention metrics. You can look at, you know, the success of individual campaigns of your employee referral program. If you do create an employer-branded content strategy, you can use marketing metrics to tie back to those specific campaigns, which Ann just basically gave a fantastic case study of what any company can do to really leverage employer branding and have tangible results. What is most important to us at Glassdoor, and for anyone that's looking at metrics, is you first have to measure, right? In order to come up with your strategy, you have to measure. And I think when it comes to understanding your employees, before you figure out ways to engage them or ways to share their story with candidates, you have to really understand who they are first. Ann just talked about it. She said it really began with sort of surveying your employees. We believe that employee internal surveys are a fantastic way to get to understand who your people are. Integrating things, and some of these are just great stories from other employers, integrating into your interview process or your onboarding process in those first few critical days when you are onboarding new hires, sending a survey to them that they're required to fill out where you find out, we know why we chose you. Why did you choose us? Why did you choose us? Who were the other top 3 companies that you were looking at? And what's one thing that we didn't have that you wish we did, even though you still decided to go with us? That's a great way to start when you're onboarding new employees, to really understand how your brand is carrying through to candidates. But then also from a metrics perspective, really, and this is why I'm so passionate about Glassdoor, we continue to reinvest in the product, trying to provide better data and analytics to companies so that they can better understand in easy, snackable reports and formats what is exactly going on at their company at that high level with employees, but also, as I said, by location, by department. Reach out to your account manager, speak to me afterwards if you've got questions. But the whole aim is that we're trying to arm companies with the data so that they can better understand what's going on. And I think that that's really the first start before you start to communicate out, is having the data and the metrics first.
Karen, how do you guys measure employment branding at Pinterest?
Yeah, so I'll say initially we looked at just traffic to our page when we were even deciding if this was something that we wanted to work on. So about 18 months ago, we said, you know, is this a channel that we want to put resources on and actually spend time to build our employment brand? Do we need this at this time? And when we looked at things like Glassdoor traffic or people visiting like our LinkedIn page, it was very clear there are thousands and thousands of people going there. And so when you think about that and the translation to the clicks through to your career site, you instantly become really intrigued by how many people are visiting those pages. So I think that was the first thing that we did was, you know, is it worth it? And we looked into the numbers of just traffic. And so the answer was yes, obviously. And then for the first half of this year, we looked at our rating. So remember when I said that late last year there was some challenging times for Pinterest, and I think part of that was, can we come out of this and see that in just the rating on our reviews and the number of reviews we're seeing. So we did some internal pushes for requests for reviews from our employees. So can we see that in the number of reviews and the rating? So those are the first 2 things I think that we're thinking about. I think over time we want to look at things like not only number of candidates coming through, but quality of candidates. So, you know, do those people translate to actual hires? Does that affect the recruiting funnel and things like that?
I always think it's so funny, especially for execs who sort of can't wrap their heads around employer branding. They're like, okay, so basically what do I have to do to get it to go away? And I'm like, no, it's like a cocktail party where everyone's talking about you and you're just watching it. You'd rather be in at the party, responding and talking and being part of the conversation. It's going to be much more fun for you. It's going to end much better, I think.
And it was, I mean, our account manager definitely helped us, like you were saying, sit down, look at the numbers, and that alone, just being able to arm our executives and our leadership team saying this is definitely something we want to invest in was really, really helpful.
I also think you're right to push on, you have to test the assumption. So one of the things our team was a bit skeptical of is Glassdoor as a company, as Alison knows, is expanding rapidly globally. But early on, our international recruiters wouldn't hear as much about Glassdoor in the conversation. And so you can pick one of two roads, right? You could say, oh, okay, we won't invest as much, that sort of thing. Or you could say, this seems like a trend that's going, we should invest and double down now. And sure enough, when you ask, like Alison mentioned, our Singapore new hires and our Sydney new hires, they're all over Glassdoor. And they're certainly filtering by location and certainly filtering by date. And so I think that's a really good point to not just look at your overall traffic, but also by team, by location, all that kind of stuff. Britt, how do you think about measuring success on
Yeah,
Glassdoor?
so two things, because I'll comment on the international thing too, quickly. So our number one source of traffic right now to Glassdoor comes from Bangalore, India. So 60% of the people who are visiting our site, and by all means check your Glassdoor metrics. I mean, that's just a great window into seeing like how often people are going, how many people are checking in on Glassdoor and whatnot. But I was absolutely blown away when our account manager told us that. And so one of the things that we're doing, and just FYI, our Bangalore office opened on July 1st. So we've been out in the market recruiting, and we've had a temporary office, but in a very, very short window of time, we have been flooded with applicants, flooded with people who are going to Glassdoor. And so we're honestly making a very, very small investment dollars-wise, and we're launching a Glassdoor page for India that we will brand specific to India, to that marketplace, and we're also doing it for London. So, you know, I think when you're thinking about your employment brand as a global company, you also want to show what it feels like to spend a day in the life in the India office as opposed to San Francisco. So I just wanted to touch on that since you brought up the international piece. And then in terms of metrics, you know, I mean, I honestly think that a lot of sort of our classic metrics of time to fill and traffic are really critical. So, you know, similar to Anne, we went through a project where we interviewed people internally, created what we call our talent profile, which is how we interview against our culture. And then from the talent profile, we moved on to having video job descriptions, and we mobily enabled our website. So if you're not mobily enabled, and I know a lot of people still aren't, it is so critical. We had our traffic increase by 70%. By making it so that people could mobily apply. So when I think about our brand and how our brand is getting out there, it's really all of the stuff that you're then pulling in as a result of that. So, you know, I do look at things like how many people are applying, what's the traffic, because our agency fees went down as a result, our employee referral fees went up as a result. So the stuff that you're doing that's going out there that people are receiving and feeding on does drive them back to your website, and it does increase the number of applications. So, you know, I mean, that's a huge one for employment brand.
So Larry and Ann, let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about, there are a million things that you could measure. What's one metric that's overrated in your estimation as it relates to employment brand or Glassdoor?
All right. At the risk of offending anybody, I think traffic, just as a number, is overrated. And I think, you know, much like we do at CARFAX in our consumer brand, we're trying to lean into the lifetime value. It's not just traffic or an application or even a hire, but which employees, which people really far up the funnel can we identify, you know, make sure they get a true representation of what CARFAX is, and we have confidence that they're going to succeed at the company. Much like you recounted, you know, at the start of the panel today, we don't want to have people come with a false sense of who we are and be disappointed. We think we're a great company, but we're not everybody's cup of tea. We want to know that. So I think the new metric that we're looking at, and I would encourage others to, is focusing on candidates who are successful after hire. So the offer letter is not the end of the day for the recruiter. The 3, 1 year, 5 year anniversary is really the goal.
Do you do that by tenure? What about for non-sales professionals? How do you evaluate their success as an employee?
Well, as an employee, every single one of the people at CARFAX has a roadmap, a game plan. I have a game plan. It's fully visible to everybody else in the company, cool. And it's published. There's a dashboard. Anybody in the company can see whether or not I'm reaching my goals. And I think, you know, you said if you're not measuring, you can't impact. And at CARFAX, we're a data company. Everything is measured at CARFAX. Even what one might suggest are jobs that have softer goals have hard metrics, and our accounting department measures them. So our accounting department is responsible for compiling and publishing all the metrics for all of our positions in the company.
Anne, how about you?
I think it's, from my point of view, it's all of the little best company lists. I could spend a lot of time, and I could take our employees' time to respond to all these surveys to be the best company in this area and the best company in that area. And we're really focusing on just a couple of lists now, and because you can really spread yourself thin. So we want to use our resources wisely and just focus. And so that means sometimes people will approach me saying, hey, you know, we've got this best company list. And one time I went for one, and then I showed up and we got some award. And I was surrounded by local construction sites and different things. It didn't feel really like our peer group, and that it would really have an impact on our employment brand. So the metrics that I would walk away from are those that I don't think are going to add much to the effort. And it's all those lists, or there are different review sites that are coming up. People say, hey, this is a great review site. It's only women's reviews or things like this. And I'm thinking, yeah, I get that, but we don't have the resources. And even if we did have the resources, I think I'd recommend that the company hire another engineer before we put another social media resource going after that. So it's really acting always as a shareholder and making those decisions for maximum impact.
I think your push also on employees' time is correct. I think a lot of times we think
Sure.
about, oh, we have finite resources as folks who work in this space. Your employees get sick of people asking them so many times.
Survey
How do you
fatigue.
like working? Exactly.
Yeah.
We talk about survey fatigue a lot, and we do an anonymous survey every quarter of our employee happiness, and it's fantastically helpful. But when you think about then adding in, okay, these 15 other surveys and then, you know, additional pulse metrics by team and all that kind of stuff, I get exhausted when people ask me how my day is going more than once a day. I think that must be tiring. So I think you're right to push on that as far as that balance goes.
If I could, I'd just love to, and at the risk of our being rated as a best place to work by Glassdoor, and our CEO being rated as a top CEO, you know, I think the Glassdoor recognition is so meaningful because it is based on what employees are sharing freely, and it's not respond to this survey, it comes from HR, it's, you know, but it's candid, it's transparent, and so that's been that's had a big impact on our business. Those kinds of things I think are really valuable.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just to weigh in, so our Best Places to Work survey, or a Best Places to Work awards program, we also call it the Employees' Choice Awards, because unlike a lot of other sort of Best Places to Work award programs that are out there, we wanted to do something that was really from the people. It's not a panel, it's not a board, it's not based on who's a customer and who's not of Glassdoor. It is an algorithm where we are looking at basically the companies that are rated the highest by their employees. There are guidelines in terms of there has to be a minimum level of engagement in the form of reviews. There has to be growth kind of year over year in terms of their scores and the number of reviews. You can reach out to PR@glassdoor.com or Best Places to Work at glassdoor.com to find out how to nominate your company. But it's really unique, and I'm glad you called it out, because again, it's not about what we're saying about the company or what the marketing team's saying about the company. It's about what the employees are saying, and that's the most, I think, authentic judge. And then also from an international standpoint, we began Best Places to Work by just highlighting really what turned out to be really large companies in the US. What we recognize is, oh my gosh, what about SMBs, right? So we created another list in the US so that it was kind of an even playing field. And then our UK presence and all the employers there said, hey, what about us?
Can we get Dublin?
And
Dublin!
We're working. We actually just opened a Dublin office at Glassdoor, which is super exciting. When I started with the company just a little over 4 years ago, I think there were around 75 employees, and now we are somewhere between 600 and 700.
It's hopping.
So we're getting there. But for those of you who are working for global companies, multinationals, we are really working hard to keep up with the pace of our international growth. We're one of the fastest job sites now in the US. We're seeing that same trajectory now in those other countries, specifically EMEA, and we're starting to see it in APAC. But would encourage anyone to make sure that their voice is heard, because we're going to continue to grow the lists. I think we did 6 different best places to work lists this past year so that we could hit on those countries where we do have an employer presence. Right now we've got, I believe, over 11 million reviews and ratings on over 540,000 companies across 190 countries. And today, Glassdoor is actually localized in 12 different countries. So we are all over the place, trying to help people find a job that they love in whatever language or culture that they're in. So just know that we're coming and we're trying, and that Best Places to Work program is something that we're really proud of.
Fantastic. So one of the things that's a bit of a challenge with this space being new and frankly changing by the day is keeping up and learning from kind of experts in the field. So if you guys wouldn't mind sharing with us either a company that you've learned from or maybe borrowed and adapted a practice from, a person that you admire or follow on social for their input here, or maybe a blog or publication that you look to kind of stay current here, share with folks here. I think everyone is here to learn something that maybe they could do something differently. Who are some folks that you've admired or companies that you've borrowed from? Karen, are you up for getting us started?
Sure. I'm actually really good friends with the person who has my same job at Airbnb, who was rated, I think, the top company to work at last year. And she was also at Facebook prior, and so she has a lot of Glassdoor knowledge in terms of what she did to be able to create a strategy. So thankfully, we work a block away, and we're also very good friends. So I've definitely picked her brain on what we should do for Pinterest, because as you know, it's not a cookie cutter strategy for every company. So picking and choosing the things that we want to work on and borrowing some of the ideas was really helpful. And one of the things that we just got more active on was requesting reviews, both to get the feedback from our employees and understand employee sentiment. Because again, if you're not measuring it, then you can't possibly impact it. So that was just a really important thing for us to start doing, was asking for that feedback. We do an employee survey twice a year, but it wasn't tied together. So a lot of that was going to hiring managers or heads of the departments, and not a lot of that was being spent on employer brand resourcing or candidate experience, which I also manage. So being able to use that knowledge from employee reviews and really impact our brand strategy was important.
I think it's a really good point. I worked at a big consulting firm right out of college, and I described the employee engagement survey as like a black hole.
And it was like, it goes somewhere.
Totally. And 3 years later, they're like, here are the results of your 2011 employee engagement survey. And you're like, I wasn't even here. Like, I'm learning on that sort of thing. So I think making that consistent, I think to your point, also making sure it gets to the right people is absolutely critical. Britt, how about you? Who do you learn from, or what companies have you guys borrowed from?
Yeah, sure. I think there's loads of people that I really respect and admire out there. I mean, Anne and I share, so my former boss from Salesforce, where I had an amazing run. I feel like I learned so much growing with that company, from 1,800 people to 8,000. And when you talk about drinking through the fire hose, I learned a lot there. So I still really admire Mark Benioff and what Salesforce is doing, as a company. I think Yelp does a great job. Autodesk does a really good job. So there are just so many companies out there that you can learn from. And the nice thing from having done it for a while is that I tend to know people at a lot of places. So a lot of times I'll find myself just fishing around, and I'll click through to something, and then I'll, most recently found myself on DocuSign's blog, and I said to Angie, I'm like, I love those videos that you guys did. So I sent them to my boss and to our entire HR leadership team, and I said, you guys, I think what DocuSign's doing is really cool. So, I think that copying someone is a form of flattery. So I'm really not ashamed to do that.
It can absolutely be someone on this panel.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Keep it in the family.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of companies out there that are doing great things.
So one thing I'm really glad you mentioned, and Larry, frankly, I'm happy you can bring this perspective, is I think one of the misconceptions about employment branding is that you have to be a West Coast company or you have to be a tech company to have a great brand in that space. Mm-hmm. Larry, help us understand how CARFAX thinks about competing as a DC-based company, but also kind of how you learn from companies both in tech and outside of tech to really build what's been a great employment brand for you guys.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we're really fortunate to have the Motley Fool around the corner, a company that shares our sort of commitment to employees and is in a non-competitive space, and we actively exchange information. But I think the bigger thing for CARFAX is, we don't see ourselves as a tech company. We are fueled by a database of 16 billion records. We have, we are a big data company, but we really do see ourselves as a consumer advocacy organization, really working to help protect consumers. And that's a lot of our touchstone and where we get a lot of inspiration for who we want to be as a brand. But one thing I would love to say in this space as well, we have found, and I would encourage you, that if you see somebody doing something you admire, call them. If you see somebody doing something that you think is interesting, reach out to them. We are eager to share our story with people because so often they share their story back with us. And you don't have to be passive in looking at what we're doing or in what other people are doing. We've called Zillow and asked Zillow what they're doing. We have great partnership with Glassdoor and talk to them. But, I'll speak for the other panelists. I'm sure any one of us would respond to an email if you had questions about what we're doing. And we would appreciate the same, opportunity to ask you what you're doing in your company if we see something you're doing that we like. So.
I think you also raised an important point, which is we do a West Coast field trip as an executive team every year. And one of the things we put in our invitation is we want to learn from you because we're not great at X,
yes.
Whatever X is. And there's nothing like, people are so much more willing to open their kimono if you're sharing something that, hey, I want to learn from you because I really admire what you do. And we're happy to share with you some of our stumbling blocks or some of the things that we're doing well at. So I think that humility really matters as you're going in the door too. And who do you admire and who do you learn from?
So there are a couple companies out there. We are very close to Salesforce. They're an investor. They're big partners of ours. Jennifer Johnson, who's spoken at Glassdoor, she's been my Sherpa. I have met with her for coffee, and she's been terrific. I also, we are trying to build more diversity at DocuSign, and so we've watched them carefully, all the women at Salesforce, and we've mimicked that. We've started Women at DocuSign and some other groups. So we're close to them. I also, I know Sheryl Sandberg and Lori Goller, and I used to work together at eBay, and so I watch what they're doing. Salesforce, Google, Facebook, they're all doing great things. I think they're leaders that Facebook went out there and uses the Rooney Rule in interviewing, which is something we've just incorporated, where you have to have a diverse slate of candidates and also diverse slate of interviewers is something we've injected into our interviewing process, as well as the fact that they made their unconscious bias training public that anybody can use is something we're exploring too. So I really think not only do they do a great employment branding job, those companies, but they're bringing in some really interesting diversity issues that we would like to let live and breathe in DocuSign as well.
And I think one thing that's cool is the Rooney Rule, for those not familiar, came from the NFL. And so I think one of the things that's cool is you see a great brand like Salesforce learning from a great brand like the NFL, learning, teaching a great brand like DocuSign. I think that's cool to see things cross industries and cross thresholds for what that looks like.
Yeah, it's the right thing to do, and let's hope it takes off.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Alison, how about you?
I'm incredibly lucky because instead of having to choose just one or two, and you all have mentioned the companies that probably came top to mind for me first as well. But every year, we're in our third year, we're hosting our Glassdoor Summit on employer branding and recruiting. It's taking place this September, the 13th and 14th in San Francisco. We do still have tickets left to be in the room. We're keeping it incredibly small so that it's a really dynamic, highly engaged, short sessions. It's really going to be a fantastic unconference, and we're hoping that people walk away with not just stories on what other companies are doing, but actually things that they can do no matter what company, even if they're not a West Coast or Bay Area tech company. The types of companies that we have speaking are representing brands like Salesforce that we've talked about, but also brands like Nestle Purina. We have the president who's doing a keynote. We have the head of global employer branding and diversity recruiting, which is an important topic these days, from Ericsson. We do have companies like Uber, and we've got Katie actually who's representing HubSpot, which we're really excited about.
So if this wasn't enough for you, I'll come better dressed and won't wear the same thing as Alison next time around, or maybe we'll match. Maybe
Who knows?
we'll just really
we're
go
probably
for
going to
it.
plan it. We'll
Yeah.
even coordinate the shoes next time. But lucky for me, I've been able to sort of really pick the best of the best across industries, across company sizes, and say, you're doing fantastic work. Would you be willing to share it and also do it in a way that's going to keep people excited, even if they're not offered cocktails at lunch, and have them walk away with really great actionable things that they can do now. So go to gdsummit.com. We're also going to be live streaming it, so if you're here in New York and you're not able to make it out to San Francisco, you're going to miss a couple of probably really great parties and the chance to interact with a lot of those speakers from those big brands. But you'll also be able to catch the majority of the main stage sessions online as well.
So just to add our perspective on kind of how we think about learning, we certainly learn from all the brands that these wonderful folks mentioned. But this morning, actually, I took advantage of my trip in New York and met with the head of people and culture at SoulCycle. And so for those of you familiar, they're a great spinning and retail brand that frankly have nothing in common with what we sell at all. But one of the reasons why they fascinate me is they find people who have presence in a room and train them to do something remarkable. And frankly, that really garners a following. There are people, when you walk up on the street, you're like, oh, do you go to SoulCycle? And you're like, oh yeah, I go to Allison's class only, I go to Anne's class only.
Thanks.
And so they've
Fantastic.
done, absolutely. And so I think one of the things that I love learning from people is how do you do one specific thing just incredibly well, and what can we learn from that? And that enthusiasm and dedication, like my goal is if you're a HubSpot customer, that when you talk about your account manager, your support rep, or someone you met on our PM team, that you have that same loyalty and excitement. Like you would not believe how great my experience with this person is. And so I think there are things you can learn from great brands, from Zappos to SoulCycle, who are doing this incredibly well. And so I think that would be the one takeaway I'd have as well. I don't know if you guys have heard, but I've heard a rumor that engineers are hard to hire.
No.
And so let's talk a little bit, we've talked about kind of boiling the ocean and trying to get to a wide swath of candidates. Let's talk about maybe for you it's not engineers, maybe for you it's a different subset or target persona of people. Let's talk about kind of the hardest to get candidates and maybe a tactic or a technique you've used, Glassdoor or otherwise on the employer branding or recruiting side that you're particularly proud of. Karen, do you mind starting us there?
Sure. For us, it's engineers. Probably a lot of people can relate. I don't know on the East Coast, but West Coast talent is hard to come by, and there's lots of companies that are fighting for that same person. So I think a couple of things. Tactically, we have an engineering site, engineering.pinterest.com. We have an engineering-specific Facebook site. So, we do things very targeted to engineering. More holistically, looking at giving more insight into what it's like to work at our engineering team. So through our Glassdoor page, through our Facebook page, trying to create a sense of culture external to Pinterest. So looking outward instead of just looking in. I think a lot of companies look at culture and they just look at what's happening here and how do we share that just amongst us, especially as we grow. Pinterest is almost 1,000 employees, so just getting all 1,000 of us marching in the same direction, I think is challenging. But what's more challenging is flipping that coin and letting people see what's inside of Pinterest and how they can picture themselves working there. And so just trying to share, we did something similar with videos with employees. We interviewed employees and asked them why they came to Pinterest or why they stay or why they come back every day. And then we shared those videos on our page. We also did a very engineering-specific video that's also on our engineering page, which is targeted to look at the whole a product cycle, so from idea to ship of that product and what that looks like, how an engineer can play a part in that project, and just, again, giving more insight into what it's like to work at Pinterest as an engineer.
Those are great examples. Britt, how
Yeah,
about you?
sure. So there are lots of things for us. I mean, number one for us is employee referrals. So 44% of our hires come from employee referrals. And our company's 12 years old, so it's something that we cultivate all the time. And when we have really tough to fill jobs, we've actually put something in where we either do a double down or a triple play. So we pay $5,000 for every engineer we hire, but if it's a really tough data engineer, we'll triple that and we'll pay somebody $15,000. So we've actually had the pleasure of presenting people at Lithium with a massive check for, $30,000 for, when we're going through a real hiring blitz. And part of it is just really getting people to go out there and pulse their networks. So we also do kind of like jam meetup sessions where we'll invite people down. We'll have like big party in Prometheus, which is like our big game room, and we'll have cocktails and a theme, and we're like, come on down, bring your laptop, let me dig into LinkedIn with you, and just really start to think about like how are we getting every single person in the company to be a recruiter, to think like a recruiter, and to realize like, so often we hear, oh, they're not looking. And I've had recruiters on my team who will reach out directly to someone who's not looking, and they're like, yeah, I'm really interested, and it's because they're connected to someone. So it's really just, I think for us and for so many people, but it's really about just always pumping the network and really getting everyone in your company to feel like, recruiting is part of their job. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Larry, how about you?
Yeah, I think so. Our company was started 30 years ago. So I think I might be working for the company that's been around longer, maybe than all the companies here combined. And I think one of the biggest challenges for us is we're so well established in the area that our brand is known for, providing vehicle history reports, that for us, a big part of our employee brand and our efforts are to educate engineers, developers, that we're innovative, that we're doing new and interesting things, and that while we're so well known in this one space and we've been around for such a long time, that we are doing cool and interesting things. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we're so happy when people talk about our expansion, that they're like, oh, it's a DC company with a West Coast feel. So you can only imagine being like the old company, headquartered in Washington, DC, what the challenge is like recruiting engineers and developers to come live, in Northern Virginia. But I know. But it is a cool place if you're interested. It's got great county parks, and really good education. But, we're working against that tide, right? Like, great developers, great engineers may come to work at CARFAX. We want to keep them, but everybody wants to go to the Bay Area. That's you want to go to Seattle or San Francisco, and we have to work hard to make sure that our development staff are not only attracted to come and work at CARFAX, and we're doing new and interesting things to to make sure that people know that, but to keep our best and most talented staff at CARFAX, and and not be distracted by all your whiz-bangy stuff out in San Francisco.
So that's a first for me, hearing county parks.
Yeah.
As a state to get engineers. We can all write that down. So that's a different one for me. Anne, you want to finish this up, and then we're actually going to do a lightning round to finish up.
Yeah, sure. I think it's clarifying the value proposition, getting the employee referrals, and then looking at the comp for engineers.
Yeah.
So as a value proposition, I think our engineers say, listen, to engineers, they like building things, and they like seeing stuff ship. And so at DocuSign, we do pride ourselves on you write code, and it ships. And we have hackathons, and they come up with cool ideas, and they see it live on the site or through the product. They tell us, working on a problem that takes 5 minutes isn't very interesting. Working on a problem that takes 5 years is. And DocuSign, just the nature of our product, seems really fun. Like, I'm signing something, woohoo! And you're out the door. But actually, to make that signature legal in France, China, the United States, and Brazil all at the same time in financial services is not an easy thing to pull off. And so the engineers love that. So there's that whole just value proposition. You throw in, lunches and hackathons and, cool t-shirts and stuff, and create a culture, and that's compelling. And then we get employee referrals. On our best month, I think we hit like 51% or something. So we're in the sort of the 45-50% for the employee referrals. We do the jam sessions. We do sometimes double down on the engineering jobs or targeted jobs that we're looking to fill. And then finally, we sit down with the comp guys every once in a while. We say, what's market? And do we need to do something special for engineers? Which is okay by me. I'm a shareholder. We need good engineers. And so if they get a little more, that's fine. After you, family hold back. What else do you need? Can I get you a coffee?
I think that's great advice. So we're getting to the conclusion. I want to get people here out of time. So very quick, 1 sentence or 2 sentences max. I'm going to hold everyone accountable. Leave here and just finish the sentence. So what should everyone leave here and do that might be different, unique, that sort of thing? Your one best piece of advice. Allison, you're up.
I was just going to say, leave here and make sure that you have at least a free employer account. Because, and it's not really a Glassdoor commercial, we're trying to, again, connect people, right, with jobs and companies they're going to love. Every person in this room, doesn't matter the budget, the industry, size of company, as a representative of your company, you can go to Glassdoor. You can get a free employer account. It will enable you to do things like add photos, edit your description, and most importantly, be able to access reports and respond to reviews. We've heard how important that stuff is today. It doesn't cost anything. It's really the #1 thing that I would say, everyone in this room, it's something you can go do today. So if you have any questions, also see me after.
Okay, and we're coming back this way. Leave
here and really go talk to your employees and really try and find out what is special about your company. There is something that is unique to your company that gets people jazzed up. And that's the only thing that's going to resonate with them and play to people and feel authentic. And if it's not authentic, if it's coming just from the C-suite, if it's not connecting top and down, then, it's not going to work.
Great advice. Larry?
Leave here and realize you have an employer brand, and it is really your decision whether or not you want to engage with it, manage it, curate it. But you have an employer brand, even if you're not aware of it. And if you could hook a brother up if you're shopping for a used car, CARFAX.com.
You and Alison with the plug. Visit a county park while you're at it. Britt, how about you?
Oh boy. Okay. I would say don't overthink it.
Yeah.
Like you said, you do have an employer brand. Look at who your advocates are internally, and just remember, there's nothing that you can screw up. Any response is a good response. Anything that you're doing to engage with your employees and people who are out there, and to other points, you can post free media. So again, don't overthink it. Take a picture with your iPhone and post it. Write a comment. Hey, thanks so much. Just knowing that you're there and engaging does not require, your e-staff to sign off on. So.
I agree. Great advice. Karen?
I would say read every review and use that to fuel your strategy. So if you don't have any reviews, think about what we talked about up here today. But a lot of times you'll learn where it is you need to spend your time by what people are saying, whether that be candidates, whether that be somebody about the benefits, whether that be employees about their culture or their organization that they're in within your company. I think you'll get a lot of insight into where you should focus first. Because usually the most noisy is the most in flux, and those are the people that need the most attention at that moment. And then you can build on that going forward.
I think that's great advice. My final piece of advice is to stand for something. So we created this document called the Culture Code. One of our co-founders wrote it. It's a 125-slide deck on SlideShare. To be honest, I thought 5 people, including me, would read it, and 2 million people have read it. And the reason for that is, as Ann mentioned, it's authentic. It's updated by our employees. We view it like we update it on a quarterly basis and we refactor on a regular basis. And one of the questions I get from people is, how did you get consensus from every employee that it was ready to ship? And the short answer is we didn't. We waited until we felt good about it. To Ann's point, we talked to a lot of employees and got a ton of feedback, and then we decided, you know what, putting something out there is much better than not saying what we stand for in the world. And so one of the other things I'd encourage you all to do is employment branding is tough because everyone feels like they're an expert. And so one of the things I would encourage you all to do is take a stand on something as you leave here, and to encourage your team to codify what it means to be a DocuSign employee, what it means to be a CARFAX employee, what it means to be a Lithium employee, because I do think it matters. Most importantly, I know you all are incredibly, incredibly busy human beings, and so I want to thank you for your time, energy, and effort, and for all the great work you're doing for candidates, employees, and alumni of your respective companies. So a big thank you to all of you for being here today, and to our live stream folks for tuning in. Thank you guys so much. And I believe networking and cocktails continue on, so stick around.
Great, that was good. I love what you said.
That was good.